The elevator doors closed in front of me with a soft, final chime too calm for what had just happened. I stood there, clutching a cardboard box that held the fragments of 3 years of my life, my access badge, my laptop, a framed photo I barely remembered placing on my desk. Just minutes ago, I had been the lead strategist of a $4.1 billion merger. Now, I was unemployed, all because of a skirt. If you want to know why that happened, go ahead and like this video. I'd also love to know where you're listening from and what the temperature is like there right now. It makes me happy to see how far my story's reaching. Now, let me tell you the whole truth. My name is Claire Whitmore, she had said, barely looking up from the employee handbook. And this violates company dress code by exactly 2.8 inches. Claire CEO, Richard Whitmore's daughter, freshly appointed, first day in power, and apparently, I was her first decision. I'm sorry. What I had asked, convinced this was some kind of misunderstanding. You're terminated, effective immediately. Her tone was flat, clinical, like she was approving a routine expense report instead of dismantling a deal years in the making. No one in the room spoke. Not HR. Not my colleagues. Not even the senior executives who had spent months begging me to lead this merger. Silence. That was the moment I realized something far worse than being fired. No one was going to stop it. So I didn't argue. I just nodded, packed my things, and walked out, now. As the elevator descended toward the lobby of Vanguard Analytics, my phone vibrated in my hand. One name flashed across the screen. Ethan Cole, lead investor, Orion Capital, the man waiting downstairs to sign the deal that was supposed to change everything. I hesitated, then answered. Molly! Where are you? His voice was urgent. Sharp! We're all here, the board. Legal, everyone's ready. We make history in 10 minutes. I closed my eyes for a second, steadying my breath. There's been a change of plans, I said quietly. A pause. What do you mean? The elevator doors slid open, across the lobby. I could already see him, Ethan, surrounded by advisors, checking his watch, scanning the room. I stepped forward, gripping the box a little tighter. I've been terminated, I said. Silence. Then a short, disbelieving laugh. Okay. Very funny. What kind of negotiation tactic is this? It's not a tactic, I replied. It's reality. He spotted me then. Our eyes met across the room, and in that instant, I watched his expression shift from confusion to something much darker, because deep down he knew. Everything was about to fall apart. Wait a moment, I want to clarify something. This is a fictional story, with certain elements enhanced by artificial intelligence to make it more engaging, more emotional, and to highlight deeper, meaningful lessons. Let's experience it together and reflect along the way. Now, let's continue. Ethan didn't hang up. He ended the call mid-step and walked straight toward me, his entire team trailing behind him. Up close, I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes searched my face for any sign that this was some kind of calculated move. Tell me this isn't real, he said quietly. I wish I could, I replied, behind him. Several members of Orion Capital exchanged uneasy glances. The energy in the lobby shifted. Conversations stopped. People who had been preparing for a historic announcement were now frozen, watching something unravel in real time. Claire Whitmore appeared moments later, stepping out from the executive elevator with the same composed expression she had worn upstairs. Richard Whitmore followed close behind. Along with 2 board members and legal counsel, they moved quickly, but not quickly enough to contain what was already happening. Ethan turned to them, his voice no longer calm. You fired her! Claire lifted her chin slightly. She violated company policy. For a skirt, his disbelief was sharp, almost cutting. It's about standards, she replied. Ethan let out a slow breath, then shook his head. No, it's about judgment. And this, he gestured toward me, is the worst judgment call I've seen in years. Richard stepped forward. attempting to regain control. Ethan, we can resolve this. Molly is valuable to us. This is clearly a misunderstanding. But it was already too late. Ethan turned back to his team. Speaking in low tones, I caught fragments. Risk. Leadership failure. Trust. Then he faced them again. Our agreement was built around Molly Davis. She structured this deal. Without her. We're not proceeding. Richard's expression tightened. You can't just walk away. Everything is prepared. Actually, we can. Ethan said evenly. Section 4, page 19. The key person clause. She leaves. We withdraw. No penalties. Silence hit harder than any argument. I said nothing. I simply adjusted my grip on the box and walked past them, out the front doors. As the weight of their decision finally began to crush them, the spring air outside felt strangely quiet compared to the chaos I had just left behind. I walked to the parking garage without looking back, my phone buzzing nonstop in my hand. Messages, calls, notifications. I didn't check a single one. I just turned it off. By the time I got home, the story had already started spreading. News alerts lit up my tablet within hours. Major merger collapses at Vanguard Analytics. Insider conflict derails $4.1 billion deal. Analysts speculated. Journalists guessed, but none of them knew the truth. Not really. By the next morning, the company's stock had dropped 27%. By the end of the week, it fell even further. Investors panicked. Clients began to reconsider their contracts. What had been positioned as a defining moment of growth had turned into a public unraveling. Thousands of employees were suddenly caught in the fallout. I should have felt something stronger: anger, satisfaction, regret. But sitting on my balcony with a cup of coffee, I actually had time to finish. All I felt was stillness, for the first time in years. I wasn't rushing to a meeting. I wasn't answering emails at midnight. I wasn't carrying the weight of an entire company on my shoulders. And yet, beneath that calm, there was something else. A quiet ache I couldn't ignore. 3 years of sacrifice, late nights, missed moments, everything I had poured into saving that company, gone in less than 5 minutes. Not because I failed, but because someone else didn't understand what I was worth. The calls didn't stop. Colleagues, reporters, even recruiters I hadn't spoken to in years tried to reach me. I ignored all of them, for days. I let the silence stretch, focusing on things I had long neglected. Sleep came easier than I expected. Meals tasted different when I wasn't eating them in front of a screen. Still, every now and then. My mind drifted back to that moment in the conference room, to the silence that had sealed everything. 2 weeks later, my phone rang again. This time, I didn't ignore it. Richard Whitmore. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. Molly. His voice sounded strained. Nothing like the composed CEO I had known. We need to talk. I'm listening, I said calmly. The situation here is worse than we expected. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. The board wants you back. We need your help to stabilize things. To fix this, I leaned back slightly, letting the silence linger just long enough. To fix what exactly I asked. The merger, the clients, everything. His voice dropped. You know this company better than anyone. We can't recover without you. The same company that had let me walk out without a word. What's your offer? I asked. Come in, meet with the board. We're prepared to discuss terms. I could hear the urgency behind every word now. This wasn't authority, this was desperation. I considered ending the call right there. A part of me wanted to, but another part, the one that had spent years building something meaningful, wasn't ready to let it collapse so easily. I'll meet, I said finally. But this time, I set the conditions. There was a brief pause on the other end. Understood. He replied. When I ended the call, I already knew one thing for certain. If I walked back into that building, it wouldn't be as the same person who had left. 4 hours later, I walked back into the same building I had left with a box in my hands. This time, I carried nothing but a folder. The boardroom felt different, heavier. Conversations stopped the moment I entered. Every face turned toward me, some filled with hope, others with discomfort. Richard Whitmore looked like he hadn't slept in days. Claire wasn't there. "Thank you for coming, Molly," the chairman said, gesturing for me to sit. "Let's not waste time," I replied, taking the seat at the center of the table. "In 2 weeks, your stock has dropped more than 50%. 3 major clients are reviewing their contracts. The Orion deal is gone. And without it, your survival window is closing fast." No one argued. "You asked me to come back," I continued. "So let's be clear. I'm not returning under the same conditions." I opened the folder and slid it across the table. "These are my terms. They are not negotiable." The chairman opened it first. His expression shifted as he read. Then he passed it to Richard. I watched the color drain slightly from his face. Full reinstatement. He read quietly, "Triple your previous salary, a permanent seat on the board, complete authority over strategic decisions, and equity, significant equity." I corrected. A murmur spread around the table. "This is extensive," one board member said carefully. "So was firing me over a dress code violation on the day of a $4.1 billion merger." I replied evenly. Silence again. Heavier this time. Finally, the chairman looked up. "And if we agree to all of this, I'll try to stabilize the company." I said, "No guarantees. But without me, you already know the outcome." That was the moment they understood, one by one. They reached for their pens. When the folder came back to me, every signature was in place. I stood up, closing it calmly. "Good," I said. "Then let's begin. If you were in my position, would you have walked back in and taken control on your own terms? If your answer is yes, hit the like button. Your support truly means a lot to me." I didn't give myself time to celebrate. By the time I stepped out of the boardroom, I was already making calls. The first one was to Ethan Cole. He didn't pick up immediately. When he finally did, his tone was cautious. "Molly, I'm back," I said, "and I have full authority now." There was a brief pause on the line. "That doesn't change what happened." "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm not asking you to trust the company. I'm asking you to trust me." The conversation that followed was long, direct, and far less optimistic than the one we'd had before everything fell apart. The leverage had shifted. He knew it. I knew it. By the end of the call, he agreed to review a revised proposal, but the terms were no longer in our favor. Reduced valuation, stricter conditions, more control on their side. It wasn't the deal we had built, but it was still a chance. Over the next few weeks, I worked relentlessly to stabilize what was left. Departments were restructured, budgets were cut. Some decisions were necessary, even if they weren't easy. The company stopped free-falling, but recovery was slow and uncertain. Richard watched everything closely. One evening, as we reviewed projections, he said quietly, "You've changed." I didn't look up from the report. "Have I? You're sharper, colder." I allowed myself a small, controlled smile. Clarity has a way of doing that. He didn't respond. What he didn't know was that my focus wasn't entirely on saving the company anymore. That part of me, the one that had given everything without question, was gone. In its place, something else had started to take shape. A different kind of plan. One that wasn't about fixing what was broken, but about building something that belonged to me. The idea didn't come to me all at once. It started as a quiet thought, something I couldn't ignore no matter how busy I was rebuilding the company. It happened one morning as I stood in front of my closet, staring at rows of perfectly tailored clothes. Everything looked professional. Everything followed the rules. And yet, none of it felt right. A few inches of fabric. That was all it had taken. Later that day, I called Elena Park, our head of product innovation. We met over a quick lunch, away from the office. "I need your help with something," I said. She raised an eyebrow. Intrigued. What kind of project? Something small, experimental, I replied, and completely separate from our core business. That was enough to get her attention. Over the next week, she quietly assembled a small team: designers, analysts, a few engineers who were used to thinking differently. We worked after hours, in empty meeting rooms and borrowed spaces, building something that didn't officially exist. At first, it sounded almost too simple: professional clothing that adapts how one of them asked, to different environments. I said, different expectations, different rules that don't always make sense. I told them the story, not the headlines, the real moment, the silence, the decision that reduced years of work to a measurement. No one interrupted. We started with one piece: a skirt. It looked like any other at first glance. Clean lines, professional cut. But hidden within the design was something different: a subtle system that allowed the length to adjust without losing structure or style. Why not just pick one standard, someone asked. Because standards change, I replied, and people shouldn't have to rebuild their identity every time they do. That was the moment it became real. We weren't just designing clothing. We were solving a problem no one had taken seriously, and for the first time since everything fell apart. I wasn't just fixing something broken, I was creating something new. 6 months later, the project was no longer an idea. It was real. We had prototypes, a small production partner, and a name: Adaptations. The day before the official launch, I scheduled a company-wide meeting, no detailed agenda, just a simple note: mandatory attendance. When I stepped onto the stage, I could feel the curiosity in the room. Executives sat in the front rows, employees filled the rest, and somewhere in the middle, Claire Whitmore sat quietly, avoiding attention but unable to avoid being there. Thank you for coming, I began. Today isn't about our quarterly results. It's about something new. I clicked to the first slide. The logo appeared on the screen. Clean, minimal, different. For the past 6 months, a small team has been working on a project that represents a new direction. Murmurs spread through the room. I walked slowly across the stage, letting the moment settle. This project started with a simple question: what happens when professional value is judged by something superficial? Silence. I adjusted the hem of the skirt I was wearing. This is one of our designs, I said, at first glance. It looks standard, but it isn't. With a small movement, I demonstrated how it could change: subtle, seamless, controlled. A few people leaned forward, a difference of a few inches. I continued. Once cost this company a $4.1 billion deal. The room went completely still. No one spoke. No one moved. I didn't need to say anything else. They all knew. This line is called Adaptations, I said finally. Because real professionalism isn't about rigid rules. It's about the ability to adapt, without losing who you are. When I stepped back, the silence didn't break immediately, but the message had already landed, and this time, no one could ignore it. The response was immediate. By the next morning, our website traffic had doubled. By the end of the week, it crashed entirely. Orders came in faster than we could process them. Professionals from different industries, finance, law, tech started sharing their experiences online. Stories about dress codes, about silent judgments, about moments where appearance mattered more than ability. Adaptations wasn't just a product anymore. It had become a conversation. Media outlets picked it up quickly. Headlines focused on the design at first, then on the story behind it. A senior executive fired over a few inches of fabric, a failed billion-dollar deal, a comeback that turned humiliation into innovation. Within 2 weeks, the demand exceeded every projection we had made. Ethan Cole added fuel to it without even trying. During an interview, he mentioned the brand casually. I respect companies that value substance over appearance, he said. That's why I support adaptations. That single statement spread faster than any marketing campaign, back at Vanguard Analytics. The shift was undeniable. The company had stabilized. But it wasn't the merger that was keeping it afloat. It was adaptations. Revenue from the line began to outpace our core business. Investors who had once questioned our survival were now asking about expansion. The board started looking at the project not as a side initiative, but as the company's most valuable asset. Richard called me into his office one afternoon, placing a report in front of me. "This is bigger than we expected," he admitted. I glanced at the numbers, then back at him. "Yes," I said calmly. "It is." What he didn't say, but both of us understood, was even simpler. The thing they almost lost was now the only reason they still had a future. A year later, everything looked different. Adaptations was no longer just a division. It became its own company, operating independently, with Vanguard Analytics retaining a minority stake. What started as a quiet side project had grown into something far beyond what anyone had imagined. On the anniversary of the day I was fired, I stood in front of the entire company once again. "This wasn't built out of success," I said. "It was built from a moment that was meant to diminish me." This time, there was no silence, only attention. I could have chosen anger. I could have chosen revenge in the way most people expect. But what I chose instead was to build something bigger than the moment that tried to define me. I announced the launch of a foundation funded by Adaptations profits. Its mission was simple: support women facing workplace bias, provide mentorship, and create opportunities where judgment had once closed doors. In the audience, Claire Whitmore sat quietly, not hidden this time, but changed. The confidence she once carried so easily had been replaced with something more measured. After the meeting, she approached me. "I made a mistake," she said. "I didn't understand what I was doing." I studied her for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Then make sure it means something," I replied. Weeks later, she applied to the Foundation's mentorship program. No special treatment, just a chance to start again. I didn't need to say anything more, because, in the end, the real victory wasn't in watching anyone fall. It was in rising so far beyond them that they had no choice but to see it. Through this story, I've learned 5 powerful lessons. First, never let someone else's shallow judgment define your true value. Second, silence from others can be just as damaging as the action itself, so choose carefully who you stand with. Third, always protect your work and your worth, because not everyone will. Fourth, setbacks can become the foundation for something far greater if you choose to grow instead of break. And finally, the strongest form of response isn't revenge, it's transformation. Looking back, I realized that the moment I thought I had lost everything was actually the moment I started to see clearly. I stopped chasing approval and started building something that truly belonged to me. That shift changed not just my career, but the way I see myself and the world around me. What about you? What lesson did you take from this story? Maybe it's something small. Maybe it's something that speaks directly to your own life right now. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments so we can learn from each other. And if this story meant something to you, don't just keep it to yourself. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear this today. You're not just a viewer, you're part of a community that gives back positive values.